Hi, everyone. Today we get to talk about burnout. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that word many, many times in the last few years. Many of you might have felt that word many times in the last few years. And you all do really difficult and challenging work. And so something we'll get to talk a little bit about today, because we want you to be able to continue doing the work that you're doing. There we go. I just want to start by giving a land acknowledgement and recognizing that the land that we live on and play on and work on is the native ancestral land of over 110 indigenous tribes in the state of California. Just want to pay respect to their ancestors and their descendants, all the things they have survived, and the contributions of their relatives, past, present, and future. Giving land acknowledgements is an ancient practice to respect and give thanks to the land, and I do it now out of respect for the indigenous wisdom and culture and the heritage that has left its mark on the state and on the people of California, and just in an attempt to increase awareness of the presence of the ongoing presence of indigenous peoples and the work that they have contributed to our state. I have no actual or potential disclosures, any conflicts of interest to disclose today. So for the talk today, I am hoping that we're going to cover just an understanding of the reasons that working in this field are really hard, and the complexity of caring for others and facing the injustice of the work that we do and the things that are faced by the people we work with. I'm hoping that people will develop a better understanding of state-dependent functioning, the value of self-reflection and reflective practice in enhancing our own awareness and our ability to sustain ourselves in the work that we're doing. And also that we'll be able to explore together some ways to identify your personal needs and prioritize compassionate practices to promote balance in your lives and to support those practices in the lives of the people you work around, of your coworkers and people you might supervise. I just wanted to start with some reflection. So I want you to take a little bit of time on your own and think about some of these questions. Think about the idea of who you are in a professional setting, who you are as a person outside of work. We're here obviously in a professional setting, and we bring lots of dynamics to who we are, and we are not just the work that we do. So thinking about that, just who you are as a whole, thinking about what brought you here, not just into this room, into this Zoom meeting, into this training, what brought you into the work that you do, what brought you to the place that you're at in life, what brought you into the specific job that you're in now, the position that you're in. What might have influenced your choices along the way? Thinking for yourself about when you feel your best. What are the things that help you feel your best at work, outside of work? When are the times when you feel most fulfilled, when you feel joy and you just feel alive? Do you have those experiences in the work setting? Are there times where you just feel excited about the work that you do? And what is it about those times? And what about outside of work? What are the times when you feel your best and you just feel really alive? Why did you choose the path that you're on? And who and what has influenced you along the way? What are kind of the people, places, things that have come in and out of your journey to getting to the place that you're in right now? Taking a minute just for yourself to think through some of these things and to hold on to them while we go throughout the rest of our talk today. I'm just going to give a minute to sit with that, and then I'll jump back online after you've had a minute. I'm hoping those are some things that you guys can hold on to and think about while we go throughout the talk today. So before we jump in, I did a training. I'm not sure if any of you were at that one back a couple of months ago. I think it was in June. And we went through a couple of different tools to assess yourself and how you're doing. These tools are all available for you just as a way for you to kind of check in with yourself and see where you're at. The professional quality of life scale has a bunch of different questions where you rate yourself on different items. And then you give yourself a score for compassion satisfaction, how good you feel about what you're doing and the work that you're doing. Burnout or compassion fatigue, kind of where your symptoms are, and then secondary trauma, if you're experiencing things at a higher level that might need more support. The next one on there is called the stress reaction inventory, and it's just kind of a list of boxes to look at across different areas of functioning. Are there things that are showing up for you that are challenging? They might not be specifically related to your work, or you might not think of them as related to your work, but considering yourself as a whole human being who has needs in lots of different areas, are there things that are less than optimal right now? And what are those looking like specifically for you? And in response to the fact that you do really stressful work. And then the last one on there is a self-care assessment worksheet where you can go through, and again, it kind of breaks it down into different areas of who we are as people, looking at your physical health, your emotional health, how you're doing cognitively and things that challenge you, your spiritual health. So looking at all of the different areas, as well as at work and who you are as a professional. How often do you spend kind of caring for that part of who you are? The reason I like kind of this group of assessments is it gives you a good look at how you're feeling right now. I've done all of these multiple times. I do trainings on these pretty often, and I try and do it every time that I do a training on it, and it changes from time to time. And I feel like I learn new things about who I am and where I am in that time, in that moment. And so something I would encourage you to do if you're noticing it's something you're interested in just kind of seeing more after you have started, or after we go through this talk today, if it's something you're curious about, go ahead and take a look at those assessments and do them for yourself. So one thing I really want to think about together today is the idea of who we are in the work that we do and the importance of finding our best selves and just being in a place where we feel we are doing well to be able to do the work that we do as best as we can. Obviously, we're talking about burnout today. We're talking about tough topics. And I want the focus not to just be on the work and how hard it is and that it gets stressful, but also on who we are and how to help ourselves be as successful as possible. I don't know specifically about you, but since you're all in the early psychosis world, I'm assuming you talk and think a lot about brains and people's brains and how brains work and how they function when you are at work. And I want to shift your focus a little bit to thinking about your own brain and how your own brain works. We're going to talk a little bit more about brains and state-dependent functioning. I had the privilege of going through Bruce Perry's neurosequential model of therapeutics training, which really interesting, fascinating stuff. It was developed by Dr. Bruce Perry. He is a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and he knows a lot about the brain and how brains work, and has just kind of put it together in information that I think is really easy to think and understand, and specifically understand the impact of stress on how we are and what we do and the choices we make and what we bring into different interactions, and also how to think about shifting things and finding more emotional wholeness. I do a lot of work in early childhood, and so we think about it a lot for young kids whose brains are still really developing. And the more I learn about brains and early childhood, the more I understand myself as a person and people of any age that I work with or live with or interact with. So the neurosequential model, or the NMT model, is a tool for understanding both adversity and relational health, on brain development, and on just moment-to-moment functioning and how we do things. The model itself has been used widely in different systems caring for children specifically who are impacted by child welfare system, being used in schools, on sports teams, all kinds of different things. And there's different components of the models. There's even the neurosequential model in reflective supervision. So even using it as a tool as supervisors, mentors, managers in understanding the people that you're working with and being able to promote strategies that optimize people's cognitive capacity in what they're doing, and also really understanding people's humanity and what their capacity is. So it's not just for young children, but that's just the context that I learned it in, because that's a lot of the work that I do. The model itself sets up a system for understanding sequential brain development and thinking about how our brains work in understanding different behaviors. And then always comes back to this idea of regulating, relating, and reasoning. Obviously, regulating is really important in many realms. Again, I work with children, and I work with a lot of young children who are inherently dysregulated because those systems in their brain haven't really developed yet. And the more I've learned about it, the more I can recognize when I'm feeling dysregulated, when my brain's not at its best. And also as a supervisor and someone who does teachings and trainings, also recognizing what people's brains need in general to be open to learning, to be open to expanding and understanding and collaborating and problem solving, that there's a lot of kind of universal needs that we think about. And so in order to feel like we can learn and be open to things, our bodies and our brains have to be in a regulated state, and we have to feel connected to people. We have to feel like we are able to and have the capacity to form human connections. So this is the basics of the model, is really thinking about the sequential development of the brain, thinking about the brain stem in kind of the lowest level of functioning that is all involuntary. It's the thing that keeps us alive. It keeps our hearts beating, keeps our temperatures regulated. It keeps us breathing. And that is one thing when we talk about regulation, I'm sure all of you have thought about or said to yourselves or someone else, let's just practice deep breathing for a minute, and the impact that that has on your regulatory system, because it is an involuntary practice that you take control over. It's tapping into that part of your brain. The next level up in your brain is called the diencephalon. That's responsible for waking and sleeping patterns, your circadian rhythm, your sense of feeling hungry or satiated, knowing when your body needs something or doesn't need something, and your sense of movement, how your body moves through space. Then we get into the next level of the brain, which is the limbic system, which houses your sense of reward as well as relational connection, your ability to bond. It houses your emotions, your ability to feel within yourself and feel with other people. So that sense of empathy comes from there too. And it houses your memories. So the reason why a lot of our memories are tied to really emotional things is because those kind of hang out in similar places in the brain. It's also why kind of our reward system and our bonding system are closely connected with each other and in that similar place, is that they were meant to develop together. So thinking about early infancy, our first sense of reward and comfort and connection is supposed to come in those close relationships with our caregivers, when they come and they respond to us and they notice that we need something, and they're able to regulate our bodies for us, because we can't do that for ourselves when we're tiny infants. And so that part of your brain is supposed to develop in that context. And so it just reinforces the importance of relational connection in tapping into lots of things to be able to then access that last part of our brain, which is the cortex, which is how we think and plan and act and have creativity and solve problems and talk through things and think through things. It holds our sense of hope. It holds our values of the things that are important to us. It holds our sense of time. Again, working with young kids, kids don't really have a sense of time. And what we're going to talk about in a minute, I don't know if you've ever been in that state where you're losing track of time, or you're working with people who are clearly dysregulated consistently and they don't have a sense of time. And it's because often they're not accessing that higher part of their brain in those moments. This second upside down pyramid right here is again another way of looking at that, but thinking about our core regulatory network. So again, coming back to that sense of regulation, the importance of regulation in all of the work that we do. Those core regulatory networks start really deep down in the brain. So again, I talked about like the power of deep breathing, of some of those practices that we engage in ourselves, that we encourage in the clients we work with. Those tap into a really low place in our brain, but their branches go all the way through the brain. And so they have a lot of far-reaching abilities when we're able to regulate ourselves, when we're able to understand the input we're getting from inside our bodies and outside of our bodies, and take that into a place where we can feel in control, we feel calm, then we're able to do some of these other things. But all of that information has to go from the bottom to the top of our brain, which is just really interesting and fascinating, but that's not entirely what today is about. So thinking then about how this influences the state that we're in. So if you think about being in a state of stress or dysregulation, or being overwhelmed or overworked, or feeling like you're in survival mode, that's the same upside down pyramid here on the left, where you can see a lot of energy is being put into the lower parts of our brain, which typically, when we're in a regulated state, don't need a lot of our attention or energy. But when we're dysregulated, they do. And we have less energy and just awareness, attention going into those higher parts of our brains at that point. So if you think about the state that you're in, and the reason why I think talking about this when thinking about burnout is because this is something that we probably didn't always have to be aware of. I'm talking to a bunch of professionals who I'm guessing are good at the work that you do. You've probably been doing it for a while, or you're getting into it and you're really excited about doing it. You're learning so many new things. And we as a people, as a society, as a culture, have just been through a lot of really, really tough stuff. And people who were really, really good at holding it together and getting all the things done, even the most high functioning people who you look at and you're like, wow, I wish I could do things like them, their systems were more taxed than usual. So maybe when they're used to looking like this, they're looking a little bit more like this for whatever reason, just going through all of the different changes through COVID, going through staffing problems, going through the added stress on the people that we work with, and just having even the burden of understanding and empathizing and relating to clients getting more challenging. All of those things have added to just this communal dysregulation, or less regulation perhaps than we're used to. And so when we think about that, in kind of thinking about the state that we're in, someone who is in a calm state, who has full access to all of the parts of their brain and is sending all of their energy into the parts that they can use most, and they have control over that, they have the capacity to reflect, to be creative, to come up with things They can think things in abstract ways. They can solve problems with novel solutions. They're working with, with a good bit of brain power, which is helpful. When it comes to being in an alert state, this is actually a state that we're really good at learning from because you're paying close attention to what's going on around you. You're really in your cortex, you're really able to access most of those parts of your brain that you need to learn. And then you might get back into this calm state then to consolidate that learning, to really think about what it means for you, how you might use that learning. But this is still a really helpful place to be in. As you then go down the continuum, you go into a state of alarm. Um, you might be in a state of like, what do I do next? How do I react? How do I respond? How do I adapt to these things coming at me? You might solve problems in a more emotional state. You might respond to things from just where where you're at, thinking more from what what feels best to you instead of what makes the most sense. I think for a lot of people, that might be, even if you're typically doing really well, this might be where a lot of people found themselves during the stress of COVID and all of the adaptations that we had to go through, or even just the added stress of the workload over the last couple of years. This is a challenging place to be from, and um, one that we can still easily kind of backtrack from and get back to a different state. Um, and then we move down the continuum a little bit more into a state of fear, into a state of terror. These are the places where we're acting out of our brainstems. We're sending all of our energy into just surviving and staying alive. It might not be something that you're consciously aware of. You're not standing in front of a grizzly bear and afraid of your life, but how your brain is taking in all of the stuff that's going on and trying to make sense out of it and figure out what to do. There might be times when your brain was reacting in this state, even though there wasn't a conscious threat that you're aware of. And so really thinking about, in the moment to moment, what state is it that you're in? What state is it that the people around you are in? There are definitely times I've noticed for myself, especially in the last few years, I've had more clients in these places in my office. And knowing when that's happening, my attempt to use talk approaches or think through things or problem solve, not really helpful because they're not in a place where they can do that. And so knowing for myself too, being aware of the state of other people, being able to kind of come figure out where they are, get help them to find regulation. Oops, sorry, I didn't want to go there yet. Helping them to regulate, really working on the relationships that I have. I've also noticed this in trainees that I work with, really being stressed to a point where they were really functioning from lower parts of their brains, and being able to support them in finding ways to regulate up into places where they could think about things, they could solve problems from even just a concrete place, which oftentimes is helpful for us. And when we get further and further out of this sense of burnout, I think there are more options for us to problem solve and create different approaches and to think about things in much different ways. So then we come to, what exactly is burnout? That's what we're here talking about today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what burnout is or tell everyone to just go and practice some self-care and things will feel better. But we will talk for a second about burnout. I found myself really thinking about, because I've heard the word burnout a lot. I've talked about it a lot, but in preparing for today, really trying to think about, what does burnout really mean? And the first thing I think about when I think about burnout is the idea of a light bulb. Like a light bulb, it burns out and you get rid of it. Hopefully there's a place to recycle it or something you can do that's helpful for it, but it's kind of done. And same thing like a candle. When a candle's burned out, it's done. Unless you're really savvy and can somehow like reuse the wax. I don't know. I'm not that savvy with things like that. And so then I was trying to think about burnout in other ways because humans are not expendable resources that we're just done when we're done. Burnout is not a, a state that you end in. It's not final. It's just kind of a feeling that we get. But we are renewable. We are adaptable as people. Thinking about burnout, burnout is a slow process that happens over time where we are lacking the physical and mental and spiritual and emotional resources. It's not just caused by stress over time, but the idea of stress over time without the sufficient resources to cope. So thinking about burnout, I'd like to think about it more as a solar panel instead of a light bulb or a candle. And the idea that there are often times when it's a cloudy day or it's rained for days on end and solar panels don't get what they need from their environment to be able to recharge, to be able to sustain energy. How people use their solar panels and what capacity they need, and if they're charged to a battery, there's all kinds of different questions. But this idea that there are a lot of times when solar panels can't get what they need from the environment. Similarly, there are a lot of times, and I think extra time over the last however many years, where we haven't been able to get what we've needed from our environments, from our workplaces, from our family lives to recharge. And so the experience of feeling burnt out has gotten more prominent for a lot of people. Burnout looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. Oftentimes it means taking longer to do the simple tasks that you used to do really easily, feeling more tired more often. I heard someone say recently, and I love this, that they tend to see the glass as half empty and poisoned. That is, I feel like, is a good framework for being burned out. And if you're in this session somewhere, thank you so much for that beautiful analogy. Feeling burned out is having less of a sense of wonder and hope for the future, not wanting to go to work and not being able to not work at the same time. So feeling stuck and like I have to go to work and I really don't want to. Having a lot of questions about the things that we reflected on the beginning about why you're here and what you're doing and why you got into this and what it all means for you now. Feeling a lot more doubt and shame and generally just not feeling as good about the way that things are going. But it's not permanent. At least it doesn't have to be. Again, it's not final. But it is a good time to stop and think about what will it actually take to recharge. And that might be shifting things at work, changing things at work, shifting perspectives, but really starting to ask questions. So then we come to what do we do about burnout? What do we do about it as a human being? As a professional in the work that we do? What do we do about it within organizations, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more in the final hour of the collaboration today. And what do we do within systems? We all function in systems at many different levels, and oftentimes our systems tend to add to the problem that we're talking about. And not everybody goes through systems the same way. There are people who have intersecting identities and intersecting statuses that sometimes make it more challenging for them to go through different systems or might lead to them experiencing greater levels of burnout. And so how are we thinking about ourselves and our coworkers and things that might make things more challenging across the board, as well as for specific groups of people that you work with? So let's talk a little bit about some ways to get started. And I think the first thing I would like to encourage people to do is spend some time in reflection. We did that for about a minute at the beginning of this, which is really not enough time. And the more I've learned about the neurosequential model and reflective practice and lots of different things that focus on how to really center ourselves around what's going on, really check in with ourselves and think more intentionally about how we're doing and what we need and where we are and what state we're in and how we can get into a higher state of functioning more consistently. I know it's had a huge impact on myself and my response to my own stress and levels of burnout over the last couple of years. And so I would encourage you to spend some time really reflecting more deeply on some of those questions from the beginning, but also starting to use those reflections to ask questions. I would encourage you to develop self-compassion skills. This might be something that you're really good at. This comes from the work of Dr. Kristen Neff. Her website is at the end of my presentation today. There's even a self-compassion scale that you can take on her website just to check in to see how am I doing and caring for myself and thinking about myself as I might think about someone else or someone that I work with. So the elements of self-compassion that she talks about through her research and through her work, the first one is the idea of self-kindness versus self-judgment. Thinking for ourselves, talking to ourselves in a similarly kind way that we might talk to a dear friend or that we might respond to a client, that we prioritize ourselves and we use the same skills on ourselves that we're so good at promoting in other people, and that we have kindness in general for ourselves, that we understand, wow, that was really not what I had wanted to do in that moment. And I make mistakes. And when I recognize the mistakes that I make, I can do something to make them better. So that idea of just understanding ourselves and being kind to ourselves. The second part is understanding our common humanity, that we are people too, and that there are a lot of things that we need, and there are a lot of ways that we need to be cared for as well, either by ourselves or by people who are important to us in our lives. And that the things that we go through, the things that everyone's been feeling recently, the idea of burnout in general, it's not you, it's not your job. It is a common human experience that a lot of people are going through. And so understanding that it's not just you, and that other people can and everyone could have that same experience can be helpful. And then the third part is practicing mindfulness, spending time really centering yourself, coming back to a state where you can be aware, finding regulation within yourself. So again, going back to that state of calm or a state of alert where you feel in control of your cognitive capacities and your decisions, and you're able to think and respond in ways that feel consistent with who you are and what you want to put out into the world. So I would encourage you to look into a little bit more of her work if that's something that sounds interesting to you, and develop your skills of self-compassion, but also just your awareness that you need self-compassion, that we all need compassion. I would also encourage you to either redefine or just recommit to your values. Again, getting into that reflective space, thinking about what is it that's important to you? What is it that feels missing right now? What is it that is kind of adding to this sense of feeling burnt out? And spend some time reevaluating those. And it might be that you are in a place where you need to redefine them, or it might just be that you need to remind yourself what's the most important to you, so you can think about how can you integrate those things more meaningfully into the work that you do and into your life in general. It's a really good time to start to ask questions about what is changeable. What is changeable in your life? What is changeable in your work? What is changeable in your environment? This is something that I avoided doing for a really long time. And even recently, it was probably, I don't know, 8 months ago at this point, I changed offices in my work because a lot of people left. We had a lot of turnover, and an office with a window popped up, which sounds really nice. And it is really nice to have that sunlight coming in, to see the outside world while I'm at work. And the setup of my office was really different, but it's all kind of preset furniture that's in there, and it takes a lot to move it around and change it. And so I was just kind of sitting there, and it didn't feel as good to me as my old office did. I was facing the window. So this is a little bit weird, but every time I got into a Zoom room, I felt like I looked like a vampire because the light was so bright in my face. And so I just had to do weird things. Like I would sit in the dark and keep the blinds closed because then I would actually look kind of normal when I was in a Zoom room. So all these weird adaptations that I was trying to come up with to make it feel better. Also, my back was to the door, which felt weird to me. So I'm in this environment where already feeling a little burned out, lots of turnover, we're understaffed, and I'm in this new office, which is supposed to feel good. And for some reason it doesn't. And it took me a while to be able to ask, can I change this? Is this changeable? And they were able to come in and rearrange the furniture in my office so it feels better. I'm facing the door now, which feels better. The window is kind of to my side or to the back a little bit more, which I feel like I can interact in um, digital environments and feel like I look like myself a little bit more. And so it's just little things like that help me to feel more comfortable at work. So just asking questions, it might not be your workspace. Your workspace might feel great, but it might be other things about what's going on. And so just asking the questions can be a good place to start. Um, I would encourage you not just seek to understand where you are and how you got to feeling the way you do, or if it's a coworker that you're thinking about, not just trying to understand why are things so bad right now, but spend time really imagining what you could change if you could. I recently asked a question. I was out to lunch with some friends and just asked if you had 6 months to plan to do something that would make you feel really alive, what would you plan to do? And it's actually been really cool. There were four of us out at work, and we all do similar challenging work. We all work in the mental health profession. Actually, most of them work in my office, or one just retired from my office. And it's been really neat over the past couple of weeks seeing people really think about and start to put into practice. We might not all need 6 months to make it, but let's say you miss traveling and experiencing new cultures or new places helps you feel really alive. And we haven't really been able to do a whole lot of that in the last few years, and it takes money. So really thinking about, if I had 6 months, could I start planning and saving to take a trip and make something work so I could go do something that would just, even in that moment, make me feel more alive. So starting to think about those things and imagine what things you could change more broadly, whether it's in your personal life, in your work life, things that you could add or take away, and start to have conversations about them. The next thing I would encourage is just to create a process for checking in with yourself, because life keeps going. We are talking about this right now. You're in a space where you're being prompted to think about these things right now. And burnout happens slowly over time. And so kind of taking those pauses, putting in a calendar reminder that pops up once every 6 months that says, hey, take an hour to check in and just see how you're doing, what's going, how you're feeling about the work that you're doing, who you are in the work that you're doing. So you're continuing to check in more frequently and hopefully catching some things before they get as bad as they could get. And then if it's helpful for you, read more about self-preservation in the helping fields. I have some book recommendations that I'll go through in just a few minutes, but really thinking about, there are a lot of people who do lots of research on this or just have a lot of experience in this and have great, wise things to say. Explore what people in different cultures think about and how they understand how to respond to human needs and how to connect with ourselves. Some other ideas: simplify options for yourself when you can. Decision fatigue is a very real thing. And so if you know that there are however many decisions you have to make at work and on the fly and in the moment when you're meeting with the client, or you're doing all these things and then your kids need things and your partner needs things and you're having to make decisions for parents that you help take care of, and there's all these decisions, there really are only so many decisions we can make in a day. And so thinking about, where can I cut out some of those decisions? My partner works in healthcare and gets to wear scrubs to work every day. Doesn't have to decide on clothes. Sounds really nice. Thinking about things like, if I really only have two options for breakfast and I don't have to think about it, that actually streamlines my day a little bit. So thinking about, where can you reduce the number of decisions that you have to make so that you can make it through your day and get to the end of the day and still think about, what do I want to do now? And that your days don't all just end in, I'm going to do something mindless, unless that's really what you need in that day, in which case go for it. Protect your sleep. I know you probably hear that a lot. You probably say that a lot to a lot of people, but we need as much sleep as anyone else. And so thinking about, even if it's a day a week, figuring out, how do I practice all the sleep hygiene and do all the things and cut out screen time and really just get at least one great night of sleep during the week? What can I do to make that happen? And see how that helps. Make a budget. Think about, you guys might have budgets already and do things, but think about, what could I budget for? What's something that could be exciting for me to do? And start to make a budget. Figure out, how do you plan to make that happen? Also, finances can be another source of great stress. And so it's another way to just think about and organize things in a way that takes away some of the chaos, some of the stress. Do something creative. That was one of the first things that I prioritized when I started to recognize my own level of burnout in these last couple of years, is find a way to exercise my creative side and get back into that. Take a day. You have days, you have sick days, you have vacation days. Not everyone is good at doing those, but take a day. Not a day to do all the things, but just a day. And imagine, again, get into that creative space in your head. Imagine what you could do with a day for you, to do things, to feel refreshed, to let the sun in and recharge your panels. Spend time unplugged from, definitely from work. This has been one of my favorite things. I have two phones now because I have a work phone, which is a COVID related thing. We all got work cell phones. Is I have an alarm on my work phone and it goes off at 5 o'clock every day and I turn it off. Doesn't necessarily help with my other phones or things like that, but I love times when I can be unplugged and just put away all the things. And it's been a really helpful practice for me. And I don't do it enough and often enough and well enough. So it's always something I like to remind myself of. Be clear about what you need. Brene Brown, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her work, but she does a lot of really helpful research on all kinds of things like shame and workplace culture and feelings and some great stuff. She's definitely one I would recommend reading. She says, being clear is kind. Thinking about what you need, being clear with yourself about what you need, but also with other people who can be involved in that process, being clear with managers and coworkers, and just being clear in general about what you need. And then collaborate. Talk with other people about what you could do to make things different, to make things better, especially as you prioritize your own regulation, you get into a space where you can be more creative and problem solve from a different place in your mind, collaborating with other people and really thinking together about what you could do. One of my kids, he wears costumes all the time and had on one of his captain costumes because he loves being a pirate and had it on going to bed. And then he slowly took off every piece and he said, Mommy, can you hang all these up for me in my closet? I said, sure, of course I can. He said, because when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to have so much fun. And just the joy and the intensity and the intention that he had behind that, and like wanting it to be all packaged up nicely and in his closet and ready for the day to start tomorrow. And I just remember reflecting after that moment, when was the last time when I just had that kind of excitement about doing something and really wanting to share that feeling in that moment? I loved sharing his feeling, but when was the last time I just had this idea that like, there's going to be this thing waiting for me and I'm going to have so much fun. And so that's something that I want, and I'm hoping that people will start to think more about it. What are the things that you can add into your life that give you that kind of excitement? So as I promised, here's some book recommendations if you want to explore these things for yourself a little bit more, think about them. The book Trauma Stewardship, great place to start. It's a really impactful book about doing the hard kind of work that we do, caring for people or caring for the environment or any number of things, and the impact that it has on us as people and what we can do about that. I talked about Kristen Neff's work earlier on self-compassion, so that's her book. Adam Grant's Think Again is all about accessing our cognitive capacity to think about things differently. And then I brought up Brene Brown earlier. This is a really good one. Her book, Dare to Lead, is a great one. And the 4 pivots, just reimagining justice. And this is specifically about racial justice in our country, but just the idea about rethinking how we respond to injustice as people who work with people who experience a lot of injustice. I found that book to be very helpful as well.